The small town of Somerset Springs had never seen anything like it. Decorated Marines in full dress uniforms standing shoulder to shoulder with reformed bikers. All of them gathered to honor the quiet mechanic who had changed their lives forever. No one would have guessed that just 6 months ago, these same bikers were the feared night riders, notorious for terrorizing local businesses. And nobody could have imagined that their transformation from ruthless gang members to respectful citizens began with a single confrontation at a family auto shop. This is the story of Tom Wilson, a former Force Recon Marine who kept his combat experience hidden for 20 years while raising his daughter alone. It's about how a father's love and wisdom turned a potentially violent encounter into something extraordinary, teaching a group of troubled bikers about true strength and respect. A tale that proves sometimes the most powerful battles aren't won with fists, but with courage and understanding. And most importantly, it's about how one man's quiet example created ripples that would transform an entire community. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have a special story for you. The afternoon sun beat down on Wilson's auto repair, casting long shadows across the weathered concrete of the parking lot. The air hummed with the steady rhythm of power tools and the occasional hiss of compressed air. Sarah Wilson moved with practiced efficiency through the garage bay, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her hands steady as she worked on the engine before her. At 23, she had inherited her father's gift for mechanics, along with his quiet determination. Tom Wilson stood at his workbench, his calloused hands moving methodically over a disassembled carburetor. Streaks of gray peppered his dark hair, and fine lines creased the corners of his eyes, evidence of years spent squinting at engines under the Somerset Springs sun. The shop had been his life for the past 15 years, a peaceful existence far removed from his former life as a Force Recon Marine. "Dad," Sarah called out, straightening up from the engine she'd been working on. "I think I found the problem with Mrs. Henderson's Buick. Timing belt's shot." Tom nodded without looking up, a slight smile touching his lips. "Thought it might be. Good catch." Their easy routine was interrupted by the distant rumble of motorcycles. The sound grew louder, more aggressive, until it filled the air like approaching thunder. Sarah felt it in her chest first, a vibration that seemed to shake the tools on the wall. She looked up, catching her father's eye across the shop. Tom had gone still, his hands paused over his work. To most, he would have appeared calm, perhaps mildly curious. But Sarah noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared almost imperceptibly. She'd seen this change before, though rarely, a glimpse of something harder, more alert, beneath her father's gentle demeanor. 8 motorcycles roared into the parking lot, their chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. The riders wore matching leather vests emblazoned with a distinctive patch, a skull wrapped in darkness. The Night Riders. Sarah had heard whispers about them in town, stories of intimidation and violence that followed in their wake. Their leader, Drake Matthews, cut an imposing figure as he dismounted his bike. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and arms covered in tattoos, he carried himself with the swagger of a man used to being feared. His eyes, hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, scanned the shop with calculated intensity. The other riders spread out, forming a loose semicircle around their leader. Randy Cooper, Drake's right-hand man, leaned against his bike, a toothpick dangling from his lips as he eyed Sarah with undisguised interest. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she stood her ground. The shop was her home, her sanctuary, and she wouldn't be intimidated here. Still, something in the way the bikers moved, the predatory grace of their approach, sent a chill down her spine. Tom wiped his hands slowly on a shop rag, his movements unhurried, deliberate. He stepped away from his workbench, moving to stand near the center of the garage. Nothing in his manner suggested concern, but Sarah noticed how he positioned himself between her and the approaching bikers. Drake's boots crunched on the gravel as he strode into the shop, leaving his sunglasses on despite the shade. "Nice little setup you got here." His voice carried the edge of a sneer. "Real quaint. "Can I help you with something?" Tom's voice was steady, neutral. Drake's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Matter of fact, you can. Boys and I are looking to establish a presence in Somerset Springs. Thought we'd start by having a friendly chat with local business owners about protection." Sarah watched the exchange, her heart pounding. She'd heard about this, how the night riders would move into a new area, demanding protection money from local businesses. Those who refused often found their windows broken, their customers harassed, their livelihoods threatened. Tom remained still, his expression unchanging. "We don't need protection here." A low chuckle rippled through the gathered bikers. Randy pushed off from his motorcycle, taking a step forward. "Everyone needs protection, old man. World's a dangerous place." "Is that right?" Tom's voice had dropped slightly, carrying a weight that Sarah had never heard before. Drake moved closer, his boots leaving marks on the clean concrete floor. "Way I see it, you got two choices. You can be smart, work with us." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Or you can learn the hard way why people don't say no to the night riders." The tension in the shop was palpable now, thick enough to touch. Sarah felt her muscles tense, ready to move, though she wasn't sure what she could do. She'd never seen anyone stand up to the night riders. Most people in town crossed the street when they saw them coming. But Tom Wilson didn't move. He stood there, quiet and unassuming in his work clothes, looking at Drake with eyes that had seen far worse than a gang of bikers trying to throw their weight around. 20 years of keeping his past buried, of being just another small-town mechanic, hung in the balance. "I think," Tom said softly, "you boys should leave." Drake's smile vanished. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "Or what, old man? You gonna make us?" The air in the shop seemed to crystallize, time slowing to a crawl. Sarah watched as her father's hands, still stained with grease from a day's honest work, slowly curled into fists at his sides. In that moment, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a hardness, a capability that she had never seen before. The confrontation that was about to unfold would change everything, not just for the Wilsons, but for the night riders, and for the entire town of Somerset Springs. None of them knew it yet, but they were about to learn why some quiet men are better left undisturbed. The tension in Wilson's auto repair thickened as Drake Matthews moved closer, his leather vest creaking with each step. The other night riders had formed a loose circle around Tom and Sarah, their boots scraping against the concrete floor. The smell of motor oil and leather filled the air, mingling with the growing sense of anticipation. Randy Cooper's hand slid to his belt, fingers brushing against the chain coiled there. "You got a real pretty daughter," he sneered, eyes fixed on Sarah. "Be a shame if something happened to her. Or this nice shop of yours." Tom's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. It was subtle, a darkening, a focusing of attention that Sarah had never seen before. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but carried an authority that made even Drake pause. "Last warning. Step back." Drake's laugh echoed through the garage. "Or what, old man? You'll fix my carburetor?" The other bikers joined in, their laughter harsh and mocking. Without warning, Drake reached out to grab Sarah's arm. The movement was quick, meant to intimidate, to show Tom just how powerless he was. But Drake's hand never reached its target. Tom moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his age. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward, his hand catching Drake's wrist in an iron grip. The biker's laughter died in his throat as he found himself suddenly immobilized, his arm locked in a position that sent waves of pain shooting through his shoulder. "I said," Tom's voice was still calm but now carried an edge of steel, "step back." The garage fell silent. Sarah watched, her heart pounding, as her father held Drake in place with seemingly no effort. The other night riders shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence wavering. Randy was the first to react, pulling the chain from his belt with a metallic hiss. He lunged forward, swinging it in a wide arc. Tom released Drake's wrist and moved with a precision that spoke of years of training. He sidestepped the chain, caught it mid-swing and wrapped it around his forearm. With a sharp tug, he pulled Randy off balance, sending him stumbling forward. The quiet mechanic was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone who moved with lethal grace, whose every action was measured and controlled. 20 years of hiding his true nature dissolved in seconds as muscle memory took over. 2 more bikers rushed forward. Tom dealt with them efficiently, his movements economical and precise. The first caught an elbow to the solar plexus that left him gasping for air. The second found himself thrown over Tom's hip, landing hard on the concrete floor. Drake, recovered from the initial shock, pulled a switchblade from his pocket. The blade clicked open, reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead. "You're dead, old man," he snarled, but his voice trembled slightly. Tom's response was immediate. He stepped inside Drake's reach, caught his knife hand, and applied pressure to specific points on the wrist. The blade clattered to the floor as Drake's fingers went numb. 7 years Force Recon, Tom said quietly, still holding Drake in place. Another 13 in operations I can't talk about. I've spent the last 15 years trying to forget the things I know how to do. He increased the pressure slightly, making Drake wince. Don't make me remember. The remaining bikers backed away, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of Tom's controlled display of skill. Sarah stood transfixed, seeing her father in a completely new light. This wasn't the gentle man who had taught her about engines and life. This was someone forged in combat, someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. Drake's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "Let me go," he gasped, all pretense of toughness gone. "We'll leave. Won't come back." Tom studied him for a moment, then released his grip. Drake stumbled backward, rubbing his wrist, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "This isn't over," Drake muttered, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It is," Tom replied, "because now you know what happens if you come back. And because deep down, you're not as tough as you pretend to be. You're just lost boys playing at being men." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Drake looked away, unable to meet Tom's steady gaze. One by one, the Night Riders retreated from the garage, helping their fallen comrades to their feet. The roar of motorcycles filled the air as they sped away, leaving only the acrid smell of burnt rubber behind. Sarah approached her father slowly, seeing him as if for the first time. "Dad?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Who are you really?" Tom turned to her, and for a moment, she saw the weight of memory in his eyes, the burden of a past he'd tried to leave behind. Then he smiled softly, and he was her father again, the man who had raised her, loved her, protected her. "Someone who hoped you'd never have to see that side of me," he said quietly. The sun was setting over Somerset Springs, casting long shadows through the garage windows. In the distance, they could hear the fading sound of motorcycles, a sound that would come to mean something very different in the days ahead. Because what had happened in Wilson's auto repair that afternoon wasn't just about a confrontation between a mechanic and a biker gang. It was about truth, about the masks people wear, and about how sometimes the strongest people are the ones who choose peace until peace is no longer an option. The story was far from over. The Night Riders would return, but not in the way anyone expected. And Tom Wilson's revelation would ripple through the community in ways that would transform not just the bikers who had threatened his daughter, but the very fabric of Somerset Springs itself. The evening light filtered through the windows of Wilson's auto repair, casting long shadows across the now quiet garage. Tools hung neatly on their racks. Cars waited silently for morning repairs, but the peace felt different now, charged with unspoken questions. Sarah sat on a worn office chair, watching her father as he methodically cleaned his tools, his movements precise and controlled, just as they had been during the confrontation. The silence between them was heavy with 20 years of secrets. Tom worked with the same careful attention he always had, but Sarah could see something different in the way he moved now. A grace that spoke of more than just years fixing engines. She noticed how he constantly maintained awareness of his surroundings, how his body stayed positioned to see all entrance points. 3 tours, Tom finally said, his voice quiet as he placed a wrench back in its designated spot. That's what I did before you were born. Force Recon wasn't just a job, it was who I was. Sarah leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Why didn't you ever tell me? Tom paused, running his thumb along the edge of a screwdriver. When your mother died, I promised myself I'd give you a normal life. No war stories, no violence, no shadows from my past. He placed the tool down with deliberate care. I wanted you to grow up knowing peace. Outside, a car passed by on the street, its headlights sweeping across the garage walls. In the distance, a dog barked, ordinary sounds of their small town continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Those moves, Sarah said softly, the way you handled them, that wasn't just military training, was it? Tom turned to face his daughter, his eyes carrying the weight of memories he'd kept buried for so long. After the Marines, I worked operations I can't discuss, places where the lines between right and wrong got complicated. When I found out your mother was pregnant with you, I knew I had to leave that life behind. Sarah stood up, moving closer to her father. In the fading light, she could see the scars on his hands that she'd always assumed came from years of mechanical work. Now she wondered how many had come from battles she'd never known about. The Night Riders, she said. They'll be back, won't they? Tom nodded slowly. Probably, but not the way you think. Men like that, when they meet real violence, real capability, it changes them, makes them question things. As if on cue, the distant rumble of motorcycles echoed through the town. But instead of growing louder, it faded away, as if the riders were deliberately avoiding Wilson's auto repair. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, remembering the look in Drake's eyes when he'd realized what he was dealing with. I saw the way they looked at you, she said. After. It wasn't just fear. It was like they recognized something. Tom's expression softened. Most of them are just lost boys playing at being tough. They've never met anyone who could show them the difference between acting strong and being strong. He picked up a rag, wiping his hands slowly. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't winning the fight. It's knowing how to win what comes after. The next morning brought an unexpected sight. Drake Matthews' motorcycle sat alone in the parking lot of the local diner, its owner visible through the window, sitting in a booth and staring into a cup of coffee. He'd removed his leather vest, and without it, he looked smaller somehow, more human. Word of the confrontation at Wilson's Auto Repair had spread through Somerset Springs like wildfire. Each retelling grew more elaborate, but the core truth remained the same. The quiet mechanic was more than he appeared, and the Night Riders had been fundamentally shaken. Tom went about his business as usual, opening the shop at exactly 8 a.m., greeting customers with the same gentle demeanor he'd always had. But people looked at him differently now. They noticed things they'd missed before. The way he moved with liquid efficiency, how his quiet confidence had always hinted at something deeper. Sarah caught snippets of conversations as she worked. Always knew there was something about Tom Wilson. Did you hear what he said to them? About being lost boys? Never seen the Night Rider so quiet. Around noon, a police cruiser pulled up to the shop. Officer Mike Bennett, a longtime friend of the family, stepped out, his face serious but his eyes twinkling. Tom, he said, approaching the workbench. Got some interesting reports about yesterday. Tom continued working on the engine in front of him. Anything I should be concerned about? Mike shook his head. Funny thing, not a single complaint filed. But I did have an interesting conversation with one of the Night Riders this morning, Randy Cooper. He came by the station talking about maybe starting a youth motorcycle maintenance program. Can you believe that? Sarah, pretending to organize parts nearby, saw her father's slight smile. "People can surprise you," Tom said quietly. As Mike left, Sarah approached her father. "You knew this would happen, didn't you? You handled them that way on purpose." Tom straightened up from the engine, looking at his daughter with pride. "Sometimes people need to be shown a different path. Those men, they've been playing at violence without understanding its true cost. Yesterday they saw something real, and it scared them. But fear can be the beginning of respect. And respect..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Respect can lead to change." The afternoon sun climbed higher over Somerset Springs, its light touching the motorcycles now parked peacefully at the diner, the mechanics working steadily at Wilson's auto repair, and the slow transformation beginning in the hearts of men who had only yesterday thought they knew what strength meant. In the days that followed, the night riders' presence in town changed subtly but significantly. They were quieter, more reserved. Some even nodded respectfully when passing Tom on the street. But more importantly, something had shifted in their understanding of themselves and the image they'd tried so hard to project. The real story was just beginning. A story not of violence overcome by greater violence, but of how true strength can transform those who witness it. Somerset Springs was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful changes come not from forcing people to bend, but from showing them a better way to stand. A week after the confrontation at Wilson's auto repair, Drake Matthews sat in his parked motorcycle outside the shop, wrestling with his pride. The morning sun glinted off his chrome handlebars, and his fingers drummed nervously on his thigh. He'd removed his leather vest, leaving it at home for the first time in years. Without it, he felt exposed, vulnerable, exactly how Tom Wilson had made him feel that day. Inside the shop, Tom worked steadily on a transmission, aware of Drake's presence but giving him time. Sarah watched the scene unfold from the office window, her breath fogging the glass. The tension was different now, not the dangerous kind from before, but the nervous energy of someone about to swallow their pride. Finally, Drake dismounted his bike. His boots seemed to drag on the concrete as he approached the open garage door. The swagger was gone, replaced by something more genuine, if uncertain. Tom continued working, letting Drake find his own words. "Mr. Wilson," Drake's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Got a minute?" Tom straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a shop rag. His eyes met Drake's. Not challenging, not judging, just waiting. "My bike," Drake continued, gesturing vaguely behind him. "The timing's off. Been making this clicking sound." He paused, swallowing hard. "Thought maybe you could take a look?" The request wasn't just about motorcycle maintenance. They both knew that. It was an olive branch, a first step toward something neither man fully understood yet. Tom nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Pull it into Bay 3. As Drake wheeled his motorcycle into the shop, Sarah noticed other changes in the man who had tried to intimidate them just days ago. His shoulders were relaxed, his movements less aggressive. Even his face seemed different, younger somehow, more open. Tom bent over the bike, his experienced hands moving across the engine. "When did the clicking start?" "Couple days ago." Drake shifted his weight uncomfortably. "After, you know." Tom's hands paused briefly. "Sometimes it takes a good shake-up to notice things that need fixing." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Drake's eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted with newfound resolve. "You could have really hurt us that day, but you didn't." "Wasn't the point," Tom replied, resuming his work on the bike. "Violence is easy. Restraint, that's the hard part." Outside, 2 more motorcycles pulled into the lot. Randy Cooper and another night rider, Marcus, sat on their bikes, watching the interaction between their leader and Tom. They'd removed their vests too, as if following Drake's lead in more ways than one. Sarah moved closer, pretending to organize tools while listening to the conversation. She'd never seen her father quite like this. Part mechanic, part mentor, using his skills to bridge a gap she wouldn't have thought possible a week ago. 20 years, Drake said quietly, watching Tom work. You kept all that buried for 20 years. Why? Tom straightened up, looking Drake in the eye. Because I learned that real strength isn't about making people fear you. It's about choosing not to use the power you have. Drake nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. The guys and I, we've been talking. About what you said. About being lost boys. He ran a hand over his shaved head. Never had anyone call us on our bull like that before. Tom reached for a wrench, his movements deliberate. It's never too late to find a better path. Randy and Marcus had dismounted their bikes now, drawn to the conversation like moths to a flame. They hung back near the entrance, but their presence felt different. Respectful, almost hopeful. We've been thinking, Drake continued, his voice stronger now. Maybe we could help out around here sometimes. Learn about engines, proper maintenance. He gestured to his bike. Might be good to know how to fix things instead of just breaking them. Tom's hands stilled on the motorcycle engine. He studied Drake's face for a long moment, seeing past the tough exterior to the man underneath. Someone looking for guidance, for purpose. Shop gets busy on weekends, Tom said finally. Could use some extra hands, if you're serious about learning. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline. Drake's face lit up with something Sarah had never seen before. Genuine gratitude. We'll be here, Drake said firmly. And Mr. Wilson, thank you. Not just for this, but for... He struggled to find the words. For showing us there's another way. As if on cue, Randy and Marcus stepped forward, their own faces showing similar expressions of hope and determination. The garage that had been a battleground a week ago was transforming into something else, a place of redemption, of new beginnings. Sarah watched as her father began explaining the basics of engine maintenance to the three men who had once threatened them. Their faces were focused, eager to learn, to prove themselves worthy of this second chance. The news spread quickly through Somerset Springs. The sight of night riders working alongside Tom Wilson at his auto shop became a symbol of transformation. People who had crossed the street to avoid the bikers now stopped to watch, curious about the change taking place before their eyes. But this was just the beginning. The real test would come in the days ahead, as the night riders struggled to redefine themselves, and as Tom Wilson's influence began to reach beyond just a few reformed bikers to touch the heart of the community itself. The sun was setting over Somerset Springs, casting long shadows through the garage. The sound of tools and quiet conversation filled the air, replacing the threatening rumble of motorcycles that had once announced the night riders' presence. Change was coming to this small town, one repaired engine at a time. 2 weeks after Drake first brought his bike to Wilson's Auto Repair, the changes in Somerset Springs were becoming more noticeable. The morning sun found 3 night riders' motorcycles already parked outside the shop, their owners inside learning the intricacies of engine repair. But not everyone in town was ready to accept this transformation. Marcus was bent over a Chevy's engine, his tattooed arms streaked with grease, when the bell above the shop door chimed. Linda Reeves, owner of the local diner, stormed in with purpose in her stride. Her face was flushed with anger, her hands clenched at her sides. Tom Wilson, her voice carried across the garage. We need to talk about this situation you've created. Tom emerged from under a lifted truck, his expression calm. Sarah watched from the office, tension building in her chest. Linda had been one of the night riders' most vocal critics, her diner having suffered broken windows and harassment just months ago. Last spring, Linda continued, her voice shaking, these men terrorized my business. Now you've got them playing mechanic like nothing ever happened? The garage fell silent. Drake and Randy straightened up from their work, discomfort evident on their faces. The weight of their past actions hung heavy in the air. Tom wiped his hands slowly on a shop rag. Linda, why don't we step into the office? But Drake stepped forward instead, his voice quiet but firm. No, Mr. Wilson. She deserves to say her piece. He turned to Linda, removing his work gloves. "You're right. What we did was wrong. We were different people then, but that's no excuse." Linda's anger faltered slightly, surprised by the directness of his admission. "The windows," Drake continued. "We'll replace them, all of them, and we'll do the work ourselves, after hours so it doesn't disturb your customers." He glanced at Tom, who nodded slightly. "Mr. Wilson's been teaching us it's not enough to say you've changed. You have to prove it." Sarah moved closer, watching the scene unfold. Linda's expression had shifted from anger to confusion, then to cautious consideration. "And what happens when you decide to go back to your old ways?" Linda challenged, though her voice had lost some of its edge. "Won't happen," Randy spoke up from across the garage. "We've seen what real strength looks like now. Can't go back to playing pretend after that." Tom stepped forward, his presence calming the tension in the room. "Linda, I understand your concerns, but sometimes people deserve a chance to make things right." Linda looked around the garage, at the men who had once threatened her now standing quietly, covered in honest work's grime, waiting for her response. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Fine," she said finally. "You can fix the windows, but I'll be watching." As Linda left, the atmosphere in the garage shifted. The men returned to their work, but something had changed. They'd faced their past head-on and taken another step toward redemption. Later that afternoon, Sarah found her father alone in the office, reviewing paperwork. "That was different," she said, perching on the edge of his desk. Seeing Drake stand up like that, Tom smiled slightly. Sometimes people just need to see themselves differently. Show them a better path, and they might surprise you. The next day brought more surprises. Word of Drake's offer to repair Linda's windows had spread through town. When the night riders showed up after closing time to begin the work, they found Mike Bennett, the local police officer, waiting. "Thought you might need some help," Mike said, rolling up his sleeves. "Tom called, said you were doing this right." The sight of former antagonists working together drew attention. People drove by slowly, watching as the men who had once brought fear to Somerset Springs now worked to make amends. Some even stopped to offer encouragement or a cold drink. By midnight, the new windows were in place. Linda, who had stayed to supervise, found herself sharing coffee with Drake and the others, listening to their stories of how Tom Wilson had shown them a different way to live. "It's not easy," Drake admitted, his coffee growing cold in his hands. "Changing how people see you, changing how you see yourself." Linda studied him for a moment. "No," she agreed softly, "but it might be worth it." The next morning, a small note appeared in the diner's window. "Under new management, everyone welcome." It was a small gesture, but in Somerset Springs, it felt like another wall coming down. Back at Wilson's Auto Repair, the work continued. Tom's patient teaching style began to show results. The night riders' mechanical skills improved, but more importantly, their demeanor continued to evolve. The aggressive posturing was replaced by quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you're learning to create rather than destroy. Sarah watched this transformation with growing understanding. Her father wasn't just teaching them about engines. He was showing them a new way to be strong, a new way to earn respect. One evening, as the sun set over Somerset Springs, Drake stayed behind after the others had left. He stood in the garage doorway, looking out at the town that had once feared him. "My whole life," he said quietly, "I thought being feared meant being respected. Took a mechanic to show me how wrong I was." Tom continued cleaning his tools, letting Drake find his words. "The guys and I were thinking," Drake continued, "maybe we could use what we're learning here. Start a program for troubled kids, teach them about bikes, engines, show them there's another way, like you showed us." Tom paused, a slight smile touching his lips. The ripples of change were spreading further than anyone could have predicted. Somerset Springs was beginning to see that sometimes the most powerful transformations come not from forcing change, but from showing people their own potential for good. The idea of the night riders working with troubled youth spread through Somerset Springs like wildfire. Some residents scoffed, Others worried, but everyone watched as Tom Wilson's garage became the epicenter of an unexpected movement. Saturday morning found the shop's parking lot full of motorcycles, but not just those belonging to Drake and his crew. 4 teenagers stood nervously near the entrance, each trying to maintain a tough exterior while stealing glances at the former gang members who were now their mentors. Jake Thompson, 16 and already on probation for vandalism, shifted uncomfortably as Drake approached him. The teen's leather jacket was too new, his attempts at looking tough too obvious, a mirror of what Drake himself had once been. "First thing you need to know," Drake said, leading Jake to a dismantled motorcycle engine, "is that real respect isn't earned by breaking things. It's earned by knowing how to fix them." Tom watched from his workbench, saying little but observing everything. Sarah moved among the groups, helping where needed, amazed at how naturally the former gang members took to teaching. Randy was working with Marcus Torres, a 15-year-old who'd been caught tagging buildings around town. "See this timing belt?" Randy pointed, his voice patient. "When this fails, nothing else matters. Kind of like life, you gotta get the basics right first." The teenagers, initially skeptical, found themselves drawn in by the practical knowledge being shared. These weren't lectures about staying out of trouble, they were lessons about purpose, about creating something worthwhile. A police cruiser pulled up outside, making everyone tense. Officer Mike Bennett stepped out, but instead of his uniform, he wore jeans and a work shirt. "Heard you could use an extra hand," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Got some experience with carburetors myself." The gesture wasn't lost on anyone. The same officer who'd once chased these kids around town was now standing alongside them, sharing knowledge instead of warnings. Sarah overheard snippets of conversations throughout the morning. "My old man split when I was 10, Jake was saying to Drake. "Never taught me anything except how to be angry." Drake's response was quiet but firm. "Being angry's easy. Being better, that's the real challenge." By the lunch break, the initial awkwardness had faded. Linda from the diner showed up with sandwiches, on the house. She watched the scene with growing approval, noting how the teens hung on every word from their unlikely mentors. Tom finally spoke up, gathering everyone around a central workbench. "Engineering isn't just about fixing engines," he said, his quiet voice commanding attention. "It's about understanding how things work together, how small changes can make big differences." The teenagers exchanged glances, catching the deeper meaning in his words. They'd come expecting a basic mechanics lesson, but they were getting something more valuable, a chance to rewrite their own stories. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself working alongside Jake, who was struggling with a particularly stubborn bolt. "Your dad," Jake said, grunting with effort. "He's different from what I expected. When my probation officer suggested this program, I thought it'd be just another lecture." Sarah smiled, adjusting the wrench angle. "Dad believes in showing, not telling. Try it this way." The bolt came loose, and Jake's face lit up with accomplishment. It was a small victory, but Sarah could see it meant something more to him. As the day wound down, Drake gathered the teens for a final word. "Same time next week," he announced. "And bring your friends. The ones everyone else has given up on. Those are the ones we want." Tom stood in the garage doorway, watching as the teenagers left, walking taller than when they'd arrived. Drake approached him, wiping grease from his hands. "Never thought I'd be doing something like this," Drake admitted. "Teaching kids, being someone they might look up to. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who've walked the wrong path first," Tom replied. "They know all the shortcuts and dead ends." The sun was setting over Somerset Springs, casting long shadows across the garage floor. The tools were being put away, the day's lessons concluded, but something profound had shifted in the atmosphere of the town. Mayor Thompson's car pulled up just as they were closing. He stepped out, looking somewhat out of place in his business suit. "Tom," he said, approaching with measured steps. "Been hearing good things about this program of yours." "Their program," Tom corrected, nodding toward Drake and the others. "I just provide the space." The mayor nodded thoughtfully. "The city council's been discussing it. We might have some funding available if you're interested in expanding." Maybe a formal youth outreach program? Drake and Randy exchanged surprised looks. The idea that their initiative might become something official, something supported by the very town they'd once terrorized, was overwhelming. "We'll need to think about it," Drake said carefully, looking to Tom for guidance. Tom's slight smile spoke volumes. His quiet influence had sparked something none of them could have predicted, a chance not just for personal redemption, but for genuine community transformation. As the mayor left, Sarah watched the former night riders standing in the gathering dusk, their shadows stretching long across the parking lot. They were no longer the men who had threatened her weeks ago. They had become something else entirely. Mentors, teachers, proof that change was possible. The tools were packed away, the garage locked up, but the real work was just beginning. Somerset Springs was witnessing the power of second chances, and the night riders were learning that true strength often comes in the form of helping others find their way. The mayor's offer of funding brought unexpected challenges to Wilson's auto repair. 3 weeks into the youth program, the small garage was bursting at the seams. 20 teenagers now filled the space where 4 had started, each seeking the guidance that had transformed their first students. Tom stood in his office early one morning, reviewing paperwork for the official youth outreach program. Insurance forms, liability waivers, and city regulations covered his desk, a far cry from the simple repair orders he was used to handling. Sarah entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Dad, the first group's already here, and Drake wants to talk to you about something." Outside, the parking lot had become a mix of motorcycles, beat-up cars, and teenagers eager to learn. Drake waited by the entrance, his face troubled. The transition from gang leader to mentor hadn't been without its struggles. "It's Jason," Drake said quietly as Tom approached. "Kid's got talent with engines, but his old man showed up last night, drunk, making threats about how we're corrupting his son." Tom's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Where's Jason now?" "Randy's got him inside, showing him the new engine we got in. But Mr. Wilson..." Drake hesitated. "The kid had bruises, fresh ones." The garage was filling with activity, but Tom's mind was already working through the implications. He'd seen enough combat to recognize different kinds of battles, and sometimes the hardest ones happened behind closed doors. Sarah overheard the conversation and moved closer. "Jason's the one who fixed Mrs. Henderson's alternator last week, isn't he?" "Yeah," Drake nodded. "Kid's a natural. First time in his life someone's told him he's good at something." Inside the garage, Jason worked intently on an engine, his movements precise despite the fresh bruises visible on his arms. At 16, he carried himself like someone much older, his eyes holding a wariness that spoke of hard lessons learned too young. Tom approached him slowly, noting how the boy tensed slightly before recognizing who it was. "Heard you did good work on that alternator." Jason's face brightened momentarily before the guard went back up. "Just did what Drake showed me." "Sometimes," Tom said carefully, "the hardest part isn't learning new skills. It's unlearning old fears." The boy's hand stilled on the engine. "Drake told you about my dad?" "He's concerned. We all are." Jason's shoulders hunched. "It's not... I can handle it." Tom was quiet for a moment, remembering other young men he'd known, in the Marines, in combat zones, who'd said the same thing. There's handling something, and there's getting help to change it. Took Drake and his friends a while to learn the difference. Across the garage, Drake was working with 2 other teens, but his attention kept drifting to Jason. The former gang leader had found an unexpected calling in mentoring, and his protective instincts had shifted from his motorcycle club to these kids who reminded him so much of his younger self. Linda from the diner arrived with her usual morning delivery of coffee and muffins. But today she brought something else. Information. "That father of his," she whispered to Tom. "I've seen him at the diner. The things he says to that boy." She shook her head. "Someone needs to do something." Sarah organized the day's lessons, but she too kept an eye on Jason. She'd grown up with a father who showed his love through protection and guidance. Seeing the opposite in Jason's life stirred something in her. Mike Bennett's police cruiser pulled up outside, and the officer entered the garage with purpose. He'd become a regular presence at the program, but today was different. "Tom," he said quietly, "got a report about Jason's father last night. Domestic disturbance. Again." The teenagers worked on their projects, the sound of tools and engines filling the air, but there was an undercurrent of tension. They all knew about Jason's situation. Many of them lived similar stories. Drake approached Tom, his voice low. "Mr. Wilson, I've been thinking. The old Night Riders clubhouse, it's just sitting empty. With the city funding, maybe we could turn it into something. A place where kids like Jason could go when home isn't safe." Tom studied Drake's face, seeing how far the man had come from their first confrontation. "It would need work, proper permits, supervision. We've got skills now," Drake said. "We could fix it up ourselves, make it something good." Randy joined them, adding, "Most of us learned to be tough because we didn't have choices. Maybe we can give these kids some." The day progressed, filled with the usual lessons about engines and mechanics, but underneath ran a current of something more important, a community discovering its power to protect its own. As evening approached, Jason lingered after the others had left. His reluctance to go home was obvious. Tom watched as Drake showed him one last thing about the engine they'd been working on, buying time. Sarah approached her father. "Dad, we can't just send him back there." Tom's response was interrupted by the roar of a truck pulling into the parking lot. Jason's father stumbled out, anger radiating from him in waves. The moment that followed would test everything the Night Riders had learned about their new path, about using strength to protect rather than intimidate, about standing up for what's right without returning to their old ways. What happened next would reshape not just Jason's life, but the entire direction of their fledgling program. Somerset Springs was about to learn that sometimes the most important repairs don't involve engines at all. Jason's father swayed in the parking lot, alcohol fueling his rage. "Boy," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the garage walls. "Get your worthless behind out here!" The transformation in Jason was immediate and heartbreaking. The confident young mechanic who had just been proudly explaining an engine repair vanished, replaced by a frightened child. But before he could move, Drake stepped forward, positioning himself between Jason and the door. Tom's voice cut through the tension. "Sarah, take Jason to the office." As Sarah guided the trembling teenager away, Jason's father stumbled toward the entrance. "This is family business," he slurred. "Ain't none of your concern." "That's where you're wrong." Tom moved with quiet purpose, emerging from the garage into the fading daylight. Drake and Randy flanked him, their presence solid but controlled. The men who had once used intimidation to command respect now stood as protectors. "You don't get to touch him anymore," Drake said, his voice steady. "It stops today." Jason's father laughed bitterly. "What? You grease monkeys think you're some kind of heroes now? Playing daddy to my kid?" He took an aggressive step forward. "He's mine to raise how I see fit. Raising a child means building them up, not breaking them down." Tom's words carried the weight of experience. "You've lost that right." The drunk man's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, swinging wildly, but these weren't the same men he might have brawled with in a bar. Tom sidestepped smoothly, catching the man's arm and using his momentum to guide him to the ground. No violence, no revenge, just controlled protection. Mike Bennett's police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. The officer emerged, taking in the scene. "Got a call from Sarah," he said, approaching with handcuffs ready. "Figured this might happen eventually." As Mike read him his rights, Jason's father struggled and cursed, but his threats fell flat in the face of the united front before him. The Night Riders watched silently, their reformed nature tested and proven in their restraint. From the office window, Jason watched his father being placed in the police car. Sarah stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "You know that, right?" Tears streamed down Jason's face. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you all do this for me?" Drake entered the office, his face softening at the sight of the boy he'd come to care about like a younger brother. "Because somebody did it for us," he said, glancing at Tom. "Showed us there's always another way." The police car drove away, its lights painting the gathering darkness in flashes of blue and red. The immediate crisis was over, but the real work was just beginning. Tom gathered everyone in the garage. "Jason, you've got a choice to make. But whatever you decide, you've got people in your corner now." Randy spoke up, his voice gruff with emotion. "That clubhouse we were talking about? We could start on it tomorrow. Make it a real safe place, not just for you, but for any kid who needs it." The idea took root immediately. Other night riders who had been hanging back stepped forward, offering help, resources, and ideas. The transformation of their old headquarters from a symbol of intimidation to one of protection seemed fitting. Linda arrived, having heard the commotion. "He'll stay with me tonight," she announced, her tone brooking no argument. "Got a spare room above the diner. Been thinking about making it a proper shelter anyway." As the group discussed plans, Sarah watched her father. He stood slightly apart, observing the former gang members taking initiative, planning, and organizing. They didn't need his guidance anymore. They had found their own path to strength. Later that night, after Jason had been safely settled at Linda's and the garage had quieted, Drake lingered behind. "Never thought I'd say this," he admitted to Tom, "but stopping a bully felt better than being one ever did." Tom nodded. Power isn't about control, it's about protection. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to Somerset Springs. Word of the confrontation had spread, but instead of fear or gossip, it sparked action. People showed up at the old clubhouse with tools, supplies, and offers of help. The Night Riders worked alongside community members, their shared purpose bridging old divides. The clubhouse's transformation became a symbol of their own, a visible reminder that change was possible, that redemption could be built one nail at a time. Sarah watched as Jason worked alongside his new mentors, his movements more confident with each passing hour. The bruises would fade, but the strength he was finding would last. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" she asked her father. "When you first started teaching them, you saw the potential for something bigger." Tom smiled slightly. "Sometimes people just need to be shown what they're capable of. The rest they figure out on their own." The sun climbed higher over Somerset Springs, shining down on a community that was learning, step by step, what it meant to stand together. The Night Riders had found their true calling, not in intimidation, but in protection. And in doing so, they were helping to build something far stronger than fear. They were building hope. The old Night Riders clubhouse stood at the edge of Somerset Springs, its weathered exterior telling stories of darker days. But on this bright morning, the sound of construction filled the air. Where motorcycle engines once roared in defiance, now came the rhythm of hammers and saws. Drake stood in what used to be the main gathering room, studying blueprints spread across a makeshift table. The plans, drawn up by Sarah using her engineering knowledge, showed the vision of what this place could become. Dormitory-style rooms upstairs, counseling spaces below, and a workshop area where kids could learn trades. "Never thought I'd be tearing down our old bar to build bedrooms," Randy mused, pulling down paneling that reeked of stale beer and cigarettes. "Remember how proud we were when we built this place?" "We were proud of the wrong things," Drake replied, his fingers tracing the blueprint lines. "Took Mr. Wilson to show us what real pride feels like." Outside, the transformation was even more dramatic. Community members who had once crossed the street to avoid the Night Riders now worked alongside them. Mayor Thompson had expedited the permits, and local businesses had donated materials. Even those initially skeptical of reformed gang members running a youth shelter couldn't deny the sincerity of their efforts. Tom arrived with another truck of supplies, Jason helping him unload. The teenager had spent the past week at Linda's diner, but he spent every free moment at the construction site. His father remained in custody, facing charges, but Jason had found something more valuable than revenge purpose. "Main support beam needs reinforcing," Tom observed, examining the structure. "Can't build something new on a weak foundation." The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. They'd been working not just on the building, but on themselves, strengthening their own foundations. Sarah emerged from the back room where she'd been installing electrical wiring. "Dad, come look at this." She led him to a large space she'd modified from the original plans. "I thought maybe a library? Quiet space for studying?" Tom smiled, noting how his daughter had taken this project to heart. She'd always been good with engines, but now she was building something bigger, a future for kids who needed one. The day progressed with steady work, but it wasn't just construction happening. Stories were being shared, bridges built between former adversaries. Mike Bennett stopped by during his patrol, bringing coffee and news. "Just heard from the DA," he told Tom quietly. "Jason's father's looking at serious time. Too many priors, too much evidence." He watched Jason working confidently with a power drill. "Kid's gonna need permanent arrangements." Linda, who had been organizing lunch for the workers, overheard. "Already working on it," she said firmly. "Talking to family services about fostering. Lord knows I've got the room, and that boy needs stability." The announcement of lunch brought everyone together in what would become the dining area. The contrast was striking: former gang members sharing sandwiches with business owners, teenagers working alongside the people who used to fear them. Drake stood to address the group, something that once would have made him uncomfortable. "Been thinking about what we're going to call this place," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "How about Wilson's Haven?" Tom started to protest, but Drake continued. "Not just for you, Mr. Wilson. For Sarah, too. This whole thing, it's about family. About giving kids what you gave her, a chance to grow up strong, but kind." The suggestion was met with immediate approval. Even Sarah, usually composed, felt tears prick her eyes. She understood now why her father had chosen this path of quiet strength, of leading by example. As work resumed, a new face appeared at the site. Marcus Torres, the teenage tagger who'd been one of their first students, stood nervously at the edge of the property. In his hands, he held sketches, designs for a mural to cover the building's exterior. "I thought," he stuttered, showing the drawings to Drake, "maybe we could make it look less scary, more welcoming." The sketches showed the clubhouse transformed, covered in images of hope and growth. Where the Night Rider's intimidating logo once dominated, Marcus had designed a tree, its branches sheltering various symbols of protection and new beginnings. Drake studied the drawings, then looked at the boy who just months ago had been headed down the same dark path he once traveled. "It's perfect," he said softly. "Think you could teach some of the other kids how to help?" The sun began to set over Somerset Springs, casting long shadows across the construction site. But unlike the shadows of the past, these were different shadows of scaffolding that would support new growth, of people working together to build something meaningful. Sarah found her father taking a quiet moment alone, surveying the day's progress. "You know," she said, leaning against his shoulder, "when you first started teaching Drake and the others about engines, I thought you were crazy." Tom chuckled. "Sometimes the craziest things make the most sense. People just need to know someone believes in them." As the work crew began packing up for the day, the transformed Night Riders stood looking at their old clubhouse. Soon it would be something else entirely, not a place of intimidation, but one of hope. They had found their true strength not in causing fear, but in protecting others. The evening air filled with promises of tomorrow, promises of more work, more challenges, but also more transformation. Somerset Springs was learning that sometimes the most powerful changes come not from tearing things down, but from building something new together. A month of hard work had transformed the old Night Riders clubhouse beyond recognition. Marcus's mural wrapped around the building, the painted tree's branches seeming to move in the morning breeze. Below the artwork, freshly painted letters spelled out Wilson's Haven in steady, welcoming strokes. Inside, Drake walked through the completed rooms, running his hand along the newly installed handrails. Each space held its own purpose: dormitory rooms upstairs, counseling offices below, and the workshop area where troubled teens could learn trades. The bar where he'd once presided over nights of chaos was now a fully equipped kitchen. "Hard to believe this is the same place," Randy said, joining him in what had become the common room. New furniture, warm colors, and large windows had replaced the dark, smoky atmosphere of their past. The sound of motorcycles drew their attention outside, but these weren't the threatening rumbles of the past. 3 bikes pulled up, carrying members of the Iron Guard, a rival gang from the next county over. Their leather cuts and hostile postures brought back uncomfortable memories. Tom emerged from the workshop where he'd been setting up tools. His presence was calm but alert as he watched the riders dismount. Sarah, working on the building's security system, moved closer to the window. The Iron Guard's leader, a hulking man known as Bear, stalked toward the entrance. "So it's true," he sneered, taking in the mural and sign. "The mighty Night Riders gone soft. Running a daycare now?" Drake stepped outside, followed by Randy and several other former Night Riders. The old Drake would have responded with threats and violence. Instead, he stood steady, remembering Tom's lessons about true strength. "What do you want, Bear?" Drake's voice was calm, controlled. "Want?" Bear laughed harshly. "Want to know what happened to the men who used to run with us, the ones who knew what respect meant?" "We learned what respect really is," Randy spoke up. "It's not about fear." Bear's eyes narrowed as he spotted Jason and 2 other teens watching from the workshop door. "This what you've become? Babysitters?" "Mentors," Drake corrected. "We're building something here, something that matters." Bear took a threatening step forward, but stopped short when Tom moved to stand beside Drake. There was something in the older man's quiet presence that gave even the Iron Guard leader pause. "You're on private property," Tom said softly. "A licensed youth facility. Police take that seriously these days." As if on cue, Mike Bennett's cruiser turned the corner, followed by 2 others. The Iron Guard members shifted uneasily, aware that their old intimidation tactics wouldn't work here. "This ain't over," Bear growled, but the threat sounded hollow. He and his crew mounted their bikes, their departure lacking the dramatic exit they'd planned. Once they were gone, Sarah joined the men outside. "They'll be back, won't they?" "Probably," Drake admitted. "Change threatens people who aren't ready for it." Tom studied his former students, seeing not the hardened gang members they'd once been, but the leaders they'd become. "You handled that well. Used to be, a visit like that would have ended in violence." "Learned from the best," Randy said with a slight smile. "Besides, we've got something worth protecting now." Inside, the teenagers who'd witnessed the confrontation were gathering in the common room. Jason, who'd become something of a leader among them, spoke up. "They're not going to mess this up for us, are they?" "No," Drake assured him firmly. "This place, what we're building here, it's stronger than any threat they could make." The day continued with final preparations for the official opening. Linda arrived with a team of volunteers to stock the kitchen. The mayor stopped by with paperwork, official certification as a licensed youth facility. Even some parents who'd been skeptical about their kids spending time with former gang members came to see what had been built. Sarah found herself giving tours, explaining how each space had been designed with purpose. "The workshop isn't just for learning trades," she told a group of parents. "It's about building confidence, showing these kids they can create something valuable." As evening approached, Tom gathered everyone in the common room. Staff, volunteers, teens, and reformed Night Riders, all part of something none of them could have imagined months ago. "Tomorrow we open these doors officially," Tom said, looking around at the faces before him. "But the real work? That started the moment each of you decided to be part of this." Drake stood, emotion clear in his voice. "Used to think being feared meant being strong. Now I know, real strength is standing together, building something that lasts." The setting sun painted Marcus's mural in shades of gold, the protective branches of the tree stretching over all who gathered beneath. Somerset Springs had watched the Night Riders transform from feared outlaws to community guardians. Now they would see what happened when that transformative power was focused on the next generation. As the group dispersed for the evening, Sarah found her father standing alone, looking up at the building. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "When you first started teaching them about engines?" Tom smiled softly. Sometimes the best repairs start with something completely broken. You just have to see the potential beneath the damage. Wilson's Haven stood ready for its first real test. Tomorrow would bring challenges, from rival gangs, from skeptics, from the very teens they hoped to help. But tonight, in the growing darkness, it stood as a beacon of what was possible when people chose to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than intimidate. Dawn broke over Wilson's Haven, casting long shadows across the newly finished parking lot. Drake arrived before sunrise, finding Tom already there, making final adjustments to the workshop equipment. Neither man spoke immediately. They both understood the weight of what this day represented. The first arrival wasn't what anyone expected. A police cruiser pulled up, but it wasn't Mike Bennett's. Officer Rachel Chen stepped out, guiding a teenage girl who clutched a backpack to her chest. The girl's eye was bruised, her posture defensive. "This is Amy," Officer Chen said quietly. "Found her at the bus station. Was trying to run away from a bad situation at home. Thought maybe she could use a safe place." Drake and Tom exchanged glances. They'd prepared for troubled teens, but this was different, more immediate, more real. Sarah, who had just arrived, stepped forward. "Hi, Amy," she said softly. "Would you like some breakfast? Linda's getting the kitchen set up right now." The girl's eyes darted between the adults, searching for signs of threat. Instead, she found only patient understanding. Slowly, she nodded. As Sarah led Amy inside, more arrivals began trickling in. Jason, now staying with Linda full-time, showed up early to help set up. The other regular teens from their training program arrived, but they brought friends, kids with similar stories, similar needs. By mid-morning, Wilson's Haven was bustling. In the workshop, Randy taught a group of teenagers the basics of engine repair. The focus in their eyes, the pride in their accomplishments, it was a mirror of his own transformation. Drake found himself in the counseling room, a space he'd never imagined existing in their old clubhouse. A 14-year-old boy named Marcus sat across from him, tough exterior cracking. "My older brother," the boy said. "He runs with the Iron Guard now. Says I'm weak for coming here instead of joining up." Drake leaned forward. "Let me tell you about strength, kid. Real strength isn't about making people fear you. Took me way too long to learn that." Outside, Tom watched as an expensive car pulled up. A well-dressed woman emerged, Catherine Reynolds, from Child Protective Services. Her expression was skeptical as she surveyed the facility. "Mr. Wilson?" she began, clipboard in hand. "I have some concerns about former gang members working with vulnerable youth." Before Tom could respond, Amy's voice rang out from behind them. "They're not like other adults," she said firmly. "They don't pretend everything's okay when it's not. They understand." Catherine watched as Amy confidently led another new arrival toward the kitchen, explaining how things worked. The transformation in just a few hours was remarkable. Sarah spent the morning helping teens with their schoolwork in the new library space. Many had fallen behind, some had dropped out entirely. "It's not about where you stopped," she told them. "It's about where you're going." Around noon, Linda arrived with lunch for everyone. The dining area filled with conversation and laughter, sounds that would have been unimaginable in the old clubhouse. Even Catherine Reynolds had to admit there was something special happening. But the day wasn't without its challenges. A group of Iron Guard members drove by slowly, watching. Some parents arrived, angry that their children had found refuge here rather than coming home. Each situation required a different kind of strength, not the physical power the Night Riders once relied on, but something deeper. Late afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Bear, the Iron Guard leader, returned, alone this time. He stood in the parking lot, watching the teenagers work on engines, study, and move freely through the building that had once been a symbol of fear. Drake met him outside. "Come to cause trouble?" Bear's tough expression wavered. "My little sister," he said finally. "She's in a bad spot. Thought maybe..." He trailed off, the request for help clearly difficult for him. "Bring her by tomorrow," Drake said simply. "This place is for everyone who needs it." As evening approached, Tom gathered everyone in the common room. Teens, staff, volunteers, faces that showed hope where there had been despair. "Today," he said, looking around the room, "we didn't just open doors. We opened possibilities. Each of you has something to teach, something to learn. That's what makes this place work." Sarah watched the faces around her. Amy, no longer clutching her backpack like a shield. Jason, helping younger kids with their math. Drake and his former gang members, wearing their responsibility like a badge of honor. "Dad," she said quietly, "I think this is bigger than any of us imagined." Tom nodded. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built on broken ground. As night fell over Somerset Springs, Wilson's Haven glowed with warmth and purpose. The painted tree on its walls seemed to shift in the darkness, its branches reaching out to shelter all who sought its protection. The day's end brought exhaustion, but also satisfaction. They had faced their first real test not with fists or threats, but with understanding and steadiness. The Night Riders had truly become something else. Guardians, mentors, proof that change was not only possible, but powerful. Drake locked up, his keys jingling in the quiet evening air. "You know," he said to Tom, "for the first time in my life, I'm not just proud of what I'm doing, I'm proud of who I'm becoming." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new opportunities for transformation. But tonight, Wilson's Haven stood as a testament to the possibility of change, a beacon for those searching for their own path to redemption. News of Wilson's Haven spread through neighboring towns like wildfire. What started as a local story about reformed bikers helping troubled teens had evolved into something larger. 3 months after opening, the Haven was facing a new challenge: growing pains. Tom arrived early one morning to find Drake already in the office, surrounded by paperwork. 2 more towns had reached out about starting similar programs. The phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from social workers, teachers, and even other motorcycle clubs seeking guidance. "Never thought I'd be drowning in paperwork instead of engine grease," Drake said, running a hand over his tired face. "Got 3 more kids being referred from Millbrook County, and Cedar Ridge wants to know if we can consult on setting up their own haven." Sarah entered with coffee and a stack of new applications. The mayor called again. Says the city council wants to discuss expanding the program. Before Tom could respond, the rumble of motorcycles filled the air. But these weren't hostile visitors or rival gangs. The Chrome Angels, a motorcycle club from 2 counties over, pulled into the parking lot. Their president, a woman named Maria Steele Rodriguez, dismounted first. "Heard what you're doing here," she said as Drake met her outside. "Got some kids in our area need something like this. Came to see it for ourselves." Inside the Haven, daily activities were in full swing. Jason, now one of their success stories, was teaching newer kids about transmission repair. Amy had become a peer counselor, her own healing evident in how she helped recent arrivals adjust. Randy led the Chrome Angels on a tour while Tom and Drake met with Maria in the office. The transformation from their old clubhouse attracted particular attention. "Used to be just like you," Maria admitted, watching teens work confidently in the workshop. "Thought respect came from fear. But this," she gestured around her, "this is real power." Sarah worked with a group of students in the library when she overheard something unexpected. 2 teens discussing college applications. 6 months ago, these same kids had been on the verge of dropping out. "My brother's in the Iron Guard," one girl confided. "After seeing this place, he's been asking questions, thinking maybe he wants something different." The day brought a steady stream of visitors, social workers from neighboring counties, reporters working on follow-up stories, and most significantly, other motorcycle clubs curious about transformation. Tom watched it all with quiet pride, but also concern. Growth meant more responsibility, more scrutiny, more potential for things to go wrong. The program's success walked a delicate line between rehabilitation and public trust. Linda arrived with lunch as usual, but today she brought news. "Remember that building on Mason Street? The old community center? City's thinking about donating it for a second location." The possibilities and complications of expansion hung in the air. Drake gathered the original Night Riders for a meeting in the workshop. "We're at a crossroads," he said, looking at the men who had transformed from intimidators to mentors. "Other towns want what we've built. Question is, are we ready to teach others how to do it?" Randy spoke up, grease still on his hands from teaching. "Remember what Mr. Wilson taught us? True strength is about lifting others up. Maybe this is our chance to do that on a bigger scale." The afternoon brought an unexpected visit from Bear, the Iron Guard leader who had initially threatened them. This time, he came with purpose rather than menace. "My sister," he said, pride mixing with humility in his voice. "She's doing better, thinking about school again." He paused, struggling with his next words. "Some of my guys, they've been asking about your program, about maybe changing things." Sarah overheard the conversation from the doorway, remembering how far they'd come from that first confrontation months ago. The ripples of change were spreading further than anyone had imagined. As evening approached, Tom found himself on the roof with Drake, looking out over Somerset Springs. The sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the town that had witnessed their transformation. "When you first started teaching us about engines," Drake said, "did you see this coming?" Tom smiled slightly. "Engines are simple. You fix what's broken, maintain what works. People are harder, but the principle's the same. Give them the right tools, show them how to use them, then trust them to build something better." Below them, the last of the day's activities were winding down. Teens headed home with new skills and renewed confidence. The Chrome Angels departed with plans and possibilities. Even the building seemed to pulse with purpose. Sarah joined them on the roof, blueprints for the potential new location in her hands. "It's not just about fixing engines anymore, is it?" she asked. "It's about fixing broken systems." "One piece at a time," Tom replied. "Just like any other repair job." The night settled over Wilson's Haven, but its influence continued to spread, through the lives it touched, the communities it inspired, and the hope it represented. The former Night Riders had found their true calling, not in commanding fear, but in leading the way towards something better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new lives to impact. But tonight, they could take pride in knowing that their transformation had become more than personal redemption. It had become a blueprint for change itself. The Mason Street Community Center stood empty, its windows dusty from years of neglect. Tom, Drake, and Sarah walked through the hollow spaces, their footsteps echoing off bare walls. What had once been a symbol of urban decay could become Wilson's Haven's second location, if they could overcome the challenges ahead. "Place needs work," Drake observed, running his hand along a wall. But then again, so did we. The sound of motorcycles outside drew their attention. Through the grimy windows, they watched as 3 different motorcycle clubs pulled into the parking lot: the Chrome Angels from the east, the Highway Knights from the south, and surprisingly, members of the Iron Guard. "Word's spreading faster than we expected," Sarah said, checking her phone. "Got 4 more clubs asking about starting programs in their territories." Tom studied the gathering crowd outside. "Expansion's tricky. Too fast, you lose what makes it work. Too slow, you miss opportunities to help." The meeting that followed filled the old community center with an unlikely mix: reformed gang members, social workers, city officials, and teens from the original Haven. The energy was electric, but tensions simmered beneath the surface. Maria Steele Rodriguez of the Chrome Angels stood to speak. "We've got kids in our area desperate for something like this, but we need to know, how do we make sure we do it right?" Before Drake could respond, a voice cut through the crowd. "How do we know this ain't just some play for territory?" It came from Jack Hammer Thompson, president of the Highway Knights. Lots of clubs could use youth programs as cover. The room tensed. 6 months ago, such an accusation would have led to violence. But Drake had learned from Tom's example. He stood slowly, deliberately. "That's why we start with ourselves," he said, his voice steady. "You want to help kids? First you gotta prove you can change, just like we did." Sarah stepped forward with presentation boards showing the Haven's results. Dropout rates reduced, criminal incidents down, college applications up. The numbers told a story of transformation that couldn't be denied. But the real testimony came from the kids themselves. Jason, now serving as a peer mentor, addressed the crowd. Before the Haven, I was angry. Thought being tough meant being feared. He looked at Tom. These people showed me real strength comes from helping others stand up, not knocking them down. The afternoon brought practical discussions. Tom outlined the core principles that made the Haven work, the combination of skill training, counseling, and mentorship. But more importantly, he emphasized the personal transformation required of the mentors themselves. You can't fake this, he told the gathered bikers. Kids know when you're real. They've had enough lies in their lives. As the meeting progressed, Linda arrived with news from the original Haven. Got 3 more kids just showed up. One's got Iron Guard connections. They heard about the expansion plans, wanted to be part of it. The implications were clear. Their influence was growing beyond just helping teens. They were changing the culture of the motorcycle clubs themselves. Bear, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. My club's been losing members, he admitted. Not to violence or arrests. They're leaving to join this, to do something that matters. Drake recognized the struggle in Bear's voice, the same one he'd faced months ago. Sometimes leading means knowing when to change direction. As evening approached, the various groups broke into planning sessions. Sarah worked with Maria on adapting the Haven's programs for different locations. Randy helped the Highway Knights assess potential properties in their area. The Iron Guard members, once their bitter rivals, asked about training programs for mentors. Tom found a quiet moment with Drake on the building's roof, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of possibility. Getting bigger, Tom observed. More complicated. Drake nodded. Scared of messing it up. These kids trust us now. Can't let them down. Fear of failure means you care about doing it right, Tom replied. That's not a bad thing. Below them, the parking lot had become a mix of motorcycles and family cars, former enemies working together, planning a future none of them could have imagined months ago. Sarah joined them, her arms full of blueprints and proposals. Dad, she said, excitement clear in her voice. I think we need to look at this differently. It's not just about expanding the Haven anymore. We're building a movement. The night air carried the sound of motorcycles departing, not in anger or triumph, but with purpose. Each bike carried the seed of transformation back to its own territory, its own community of lost souls needing direction. Wilson's Haven was growing beyond its founders, becoming something larger than a single location or program. It was becoming proof that change was possible, that redemption could spread, that even the hardest hearts could learn to help instead of hurt. The challenges ahead were significant, but they faced them with something stronger than their old weapons of intimidation and fear. They faced them with hope, with purpose, and with the knowledge that they were building something that would outlast them all. 6 months after the expansion meetings, Wilson's Haven had grown in ways no one could have predicted. 5 new locations across 3 counties, each run by reformed motorcycle clubs. But success brought its own challenges, and on this cool autumn morning, those challenges came roaring down Somerset Springs Main Street. A massive convoy of motorcycles approached the original Haven, dozens of bikes representing clubs from across the state. But this wasn't a threat. It was the first Interstate Haven Summit, bringing together all those who had adopted the program. Drake stood at the entrance, remembering how he'd once led the Night Riders to this same spot with very different intentions. Now he watched as Maria Steele Rodriguez pulled up with 3 teens who'd completed the Chrome Angels program. Bear, who had finally transformed the Iron Guard into a Haven chapter, arrived with his own success stories. Inside, Sarah coordinated the day's events from what had once been the club's bar. Registrations in the workshop, she directed. Afternoon sessions in the main hall. Success stories panel starts at 2. Tom observed it all from his usual quiet corner, noting how naturally Drake handled the arriving leaders. The former gang leader had grown into his role as program director, his old aggressive swagger replaced by genuine authority. The morning sessions focused on practical matters, funding, facilities, training. But the real power came during lunch, when teens from different havens shared their stories. 6 months ago, I was dealing drugs for the Iron Guard, one boy admitted. Now I'm enrolled in community college, learning mechanical engineering. Another teen, a girl from the Chrome Angels territory, spoke next. My brother died in a gang war last year. Thought revenge was all I had left. The Haven showed me another way. The afternoon brought unexpected news. A government representative arrived with an official proposal, federal funding to expand the program nationwide. It was an opportunity bigger than anything they'd imagined, but it came with strings. We'll need standardization, the representative explained. Professional administrators, proper credentials. The room tensed. What had made the Haven work was its authenticity. Reformed bikers helping lost kids because they understood the path. Professionalization threatened to strip that away. Drake stood to address the gathering. Mr. Wilson, he said, turning to Tom, when you first showed us a different way to be strong, you didn't have credentials. You had something better, understanding. Tom stepped forward, his presence still commanding respect. Programs don't change lives, he said quietly. People do. Everything else is just framework. Sarah presented their counter-proposal, a hybrid model that would maintain the core of what made the Haven work while meeting professional standards. The government representative seemed skeptical until Jason took the podium. I was a statistic, he said firmly. Just another troubled kid. These people didn't see me that way. They saw me as someone worth saving because they'd walked the same path. As the sun began to set, the gathered leaders faced a choice: accept federal funding and risk losing their essence, or stay true to their principles and possibly limit their growth. The discussion moved to the workshop, where it had all begun. Tools lined the walls where weapons once hung, and the air smelled of honest work instead of fear. Remember our first lesson here? Randy asked Drake. Mr. Wilson teaching us about respect, about building instead of breaking. Drake nodded, running his hand along a workbench. Everything that matters about the Haven started in this room. The decision, when it came, was unanimous. They would accept federal support, but on their terms. The Haven would grow, but it would grow strong. Like a well-built engine, every part working together, nothing compromised. As the summit wound down, Tom found himself surrounded by the original Night Riders. These men who had once lived for chaos now stood as pillars of stability, teaching others the lessons they'd learned about true strength. Sarah watched the transformation with pride. You knew, didn't you, Dad? From that first confrontation, you saw the possibility. Tom smiled slightly, saw people worth believing in. Everything else just took time and trust. The day ended with a ceremony no one had planned but everyone needed. One by one, reformed club members took off their old patches, replacing them with new ones bearing the Haven's logo, a tree of hope growing from troubled ground. Drake was the last to step forward. The Night Riders died the day we first walked into Wilson's auto repair looking for trouble, he said, his voice thick with emotion. What we found instead was a future. Now it's our turn to offer that same chance to others. As darkness fell over Somerset Springs, the sound of departing motorcycles filled the air. But unlike the old days, these bikes carried hope instead of fear, promise instead of threat. The Haven had come full circle, transforming not just troubled teens, but the very people who now guided them. A year had passed since that first confrontation at Wilson's Auto Repair. The morning sun cast long shadows across Somerset Springs as motorcycles began arriving from across the country. But today wasn't about expansion meetings or program planning. Today was about honoring the man who had started it all. Tom Wilson stood in his old garage, now part of the original Haven's Vocational Training Center. His hands, still strong but showing signs of age, moved automatically over the engine before him. One last repair before the ceremony. Need a hand? Drake asked, stepping into the familiar space. His Haven director's badge caught the morning light, so different from the gang patches he'd once worn. Almost done, Tom replied, tightening one final bolt. Some things you want to finish yourself. The garage had changed, just like the men who gathered in it. Where tools had once hung randomly, now organized workstations filled the space. Each bore a plaque with the name of a successful graduate, kids who had found their way through engines and honest work. Sarah arrived with the final preparations for the day's event. Her engineering degree hung on the office wall beside certificates from their vocational program. She designed 5 more Haven facilities across the country, each one improving on the original. "They're all here," she told her father. "Every Haven chapter, even got some kids flying in from the new locations." Outside, the parking lot filled with bikes and cars. Former gang members, now program directors and mentors, stood alongside their students. The Chrome Angels, the transformed Iron Guard, the Highway Knights, once rival gangs, now partners in something larger than themselves. Jason, now enrolled in engineering school, led a group of New Haven kids through the facility. "This is where it started," he explained, gesturing around the garage. One man who saw something in people everyone else had given up on. Linda's Diner had catered the event, and she moved through the crowd sharing stories about the early days. "Should have seen them at first," she told a group of newer mentors. "Thought they were just thugs with motorcycles. Tom Wilson saw what they could become." The ceremony itself was held in the main hall of the original Haven. Pictures lined the walls, before and after shots of both buildings and people. The Night Riders in their threatening leather contrasted with recent photos of them teaching, mentoring, building. Bear, once their fierce opponent, now ran 3 Haven locations in his territory. He stood to speak first. "A year ago, I thought strength meant making people fear you. Tom Wilson showed us it means having the courage to change, to help others change." Drake approached the podium next, his presence carrying a different kind of authority now. "We came to Wilson's Auto Repair looking to take something," he said, his voice steady with emotion. "Instead, we found something to give, a purpose, a future." One by one, successful Haven graduates shared their stories. Kids who had been heading for prison now talking about college plans. Former gang members describing how teaching others had healed something in themselves. Maria Steele Rodriguez presented the statistics. Dropout rates plummeting, youth crime down, community engagement up. But the numbers couldn't capture the real transformation visible in the faces around the room. When Tom finally stood to speak, the room fell silent. He'd never been one for long speeches, had always preferred letting actions speak instead, but today required words. "A garage is a place for fixing things," he began simply. "Cars, bikes, engines, they all follow certain rules. You identify what's broken, you repair it with care, you maintain it so it stays strong." He paused, looking around the room. "People are harder. Their breaks aren't always visible. Their repairs take time and trust, but the principle's the same. Everybody deserves a chance to run right again." Sarah watched her father from the side, remembering that first confrontation, how he had chosen to fight not with fists, but with opportunity. The quiet mechanic who had kept his combat skills hidden for 20 years had waged a different kind of battle, one for redemption, for transformation, for hope. The day wound down with an unexpected announcement. The Haven program had been selected as a national model for youth intervention. But more importantly, the original Night Riders would be training the first generation of certified Haven mentors, former gang members teaching others how to guide lost kids home. As evening fell, Tom returned to his garage. Drake found him there, working on one last engine. "Full circle," Drake said, picking up a wrench with practiced ease. "From that first day you taught us about timing belts and respect." Tom nodded, making room at the workbench. They worked in comfortable silence, the quiet broken only by the familiar sounds of repair work. Outside, motorcycles departed into the gathering darkness, carrying Haven's message of transformation to communities across the country. The rumble of their engines no longer brought fear to Somerset Springs. It carried the sound of hope, of change, of possibility, of... Sarah joined her father and Drake in the garage, breathing in the familiar sense of oil and metal and honest work. "You know," she said softly, "some things don't need fixing anymore. They just need to keep running true." Tom smiled, closing his toolbox one last time. The quiet mechanic had built something larger than himself. Not just a program or a movement, but a legacy of transformation. In teaching others about engines, he had shown them how to rebuild their own lives, one careful repair at a time. Somerset Springs settled into the night, the haven's lights glowing warmly against the darkness. The story that had begun with a confrontation had become something else entirely, a testament to the power of quiet strength, of second chances, of believing in the possibility of change. And somewhere in the distance, another lost soul was finding their way to a haven's open doors, ready to learn that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who help others find their strength. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.